They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
All right. Well, folks, good morning, good afternoon, or as the case may be, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to a fine edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast, where if you've been listening long enough, you know I like to go point counterpoint. It's always good to have dissenting opinions. Otherwise, we just all sit here and agree with each other, and it's just not a good time. However, in the pre-show, who's got the most $2 bills draw, apparently I'm the odd one out because I do not have any $2 bills on me, as opposed to everybody else in this frame who has multiples. I don't know what's happening right now, but I haven't seen a $2 bill in forever. Anyway, that said, what an intro. I got, if you guys listened to last week's episode, we had Arsenic on. Arsenic blew up the world of vulnerability management, basically saying CVSS is as close to, Rob, I'm going to put some words in your mouth. CVSS is as close to nonsense as you're going to get. Stop doing patching. No, I'm just kidding. It's difficult to figure out what to patch and why. There's a small number of vulns that actually make a difference. Everything else is just a horrendous waste of money. You didn't quite tell us what the solution is yet, but I'm waiting for that. And so I you know, as I likely do every once in a while in the mornings and afternoons, I scroll through LinkedIn just to get my rage up in time to go to the gym. And who do I see? Well, I see Brian disagreeing slightly there with said Arsenic. So I said, hey, pop on the podcast. Let's talk about it. And Mr. Brian, welcome to the show, man.
How's it going, everyone?
You want to do a quick intro into if people that haven't been following you of lore?
Yeah. So Brian, more known or often known as Jericho, founder of attrition.org, content manager of OSVDB, the open source vulnerability database. That went away, became a commercial offering. So now I've been doing VulnDB for ever, basically 20 years working on that database alone. But I started aggregating vulnerabilities in 1993. So I've got many years doing it. So I'm very opinionated on anything vulnerability, disclosure, database, scoring, et cetera, et cetera.
But you're also very opinionated.
In general, yes. And squirrels.
And squirrels. If you don't know the backstory, I've never met somebody that dedicates their time to squirrel rehab until I met Brian. So that happened.
And raccoons.
Oh, now raccoons? Oh, God. All right.
Squirrels, raccoons, and we had 2 possums this year. Yeah.
2 possums. All right. You want to borrow some of my chipmunks from the neighborhood here? They are destroying driveways. So
you need to feed them more.
Are they out there jackhammering them in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. No, they burrow underneath the driveway. Then the water comes and it washes out in the driveway, and the concrete collapses. It's happened to 2 houses. We're not here to talk about squirrels or driveways or chipmunks that I hate. We are here to talk about vulnerability. So, previous episode, we had Arsenic on. Like I said, we talked about vulnerability. Brian, I get the sense, and we talked about this pre-record, that you disagreed with some of his points. You said you agree with the general premise. Where do we start? Where do you guys agree? Let's start there.
Okay. May I have a long monologue to set the stage?
I'm going to give you 60 seconds, but you can go as long as you want.
Okay. So yes, first, at the high level, I agree with Arsenic, and he and I would go way back. We agree on a lot of things. Trying to patch everything is not viable in today's environment. That's a given. I think pretty much every security team, triage team, they know that. So that's where it went to, well, how do we know what to patch first, right? Thus, CVSS, EPSS, all the other scores, right? Sure, we'll get to that in a minute. Where I disagreed with him was how you get to from one point to the other. Because, for example, he mentioned SysAkev, right? As of this morning, they have 1,460 vulnerabilities. Those are known exploited. Yes, he had caveats. He's right about that. But then he said, well, vulncheck. Well, as of this morning, 4,342. That's a big jump, right? How about Arkev? As of this morning, 6,392. That's 1.5% of our database. And our database has over 112,000 vulnerabilities that CVE doesn't. So those are some good numbers, but here's where it gets interesting. You think, okay, well, there's your Kev, right? Out of those, 847 of ours don't have a CVE, yet they're known exploited vulnerabilities, right? So where I'm going with this is, if you're going to say,
Brian, explain how a exploitable vulnerability doesn't have a CVE.
CVE is a dismal joke.
Moving on. Okay.
I mean, basically, it's run by people who aren't vulnerability database experts, who don't have any desire to make the system better, and who don't have any real incentive because it's a non-compete, non-bid contract. Up until next year, they knew they would get the money. Next year, we'll get those $2 bills out and we'll bet on who's going to get that contract, right? Because I've got $2 saying that Sys is going to yank it. And that was based on before the shutdown, before the big cuts. Now, who knows? But they've already yanked money from NVD a couple years ago.
Yeah.
They went until the last minute to basically, fire a warning shot at MITRE saying, hey, so anyway, it's real easy for vulnerabilities to escape CVE because they have a very simplistic 1999 mindset that they don't even do anymore. And that's back when they monitored 22 whole sources, right? Most of which became CNAs, so they didn't have to monitor them again, right? So Jim has a blog and he posts a vulnerability. He wants a CVE ID and he gets a CVE ID. Cool. He publishes his blog and then he doesn't tell MITRE. How does MITRE know that that CVE is now published? They don't, because they don't go looking for these vulnerabilities, and Jim didn't tell them, right? So that's just one scenario, right?
Okay.
Next, James is a developer. He has no idea what CVE is. He could give a shit. He likes programming, end of story, right? So you go through his change log. Guess what you find? 50 different vulnerabilities he fixed over the past 20 years, none of which have CVEs. Once again, MITRE doesn't go looking for them. We do.
Okay. That makes sense. I think that's a reasonable explanation. I'm glad you expounded just a little more because that was a rough start. But all right, now keep going. You had some good monologue going.
Okay, so 1.5% of our vulnerabilities are known exploited, right? Is that all of them in the world? Absolutely not. Today, I added something like 30 or 40 more to our Kev. Tomorrow, I'm going to do the same because once again, we know where to go look for them. We are proactive. That's how vulnerability intelligence should work. So taking that point and going into how do you know what to patch? Okay, so of those, Kev, let's say that 30% are in junk software or something never going to be used in a corporate environment. Cool, weed those out. Now you still have thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities you have to patch, right? How do you know which ones are being exploited but aren't known in a Kev? The known unknowns, right? So does that become the game? Is that you're chasing those? You're just waiting for Kevs to come out and patch them? Well, you're still going to be on the losing side of this, right? Because now you're patching all the known exploited vulnerabilities, but what happens when that new vulnerability gets exploited for the first time tomorrow and it isn't detected for days? And when it is, it's detected by Google or CloudStrike or someone, right? And then they take 3 weeks to wrap up their investigation, and then they go to the vendor. Then the vendor takes 4 months to patch it, right? How long is your risk window there? So you still have to patch some vulnerabilities. That's where EPSS came in. Oh, let's try to predict them, right? Well, you can talk to people a lot more, I'll say, knowledgeable of the math than me about EPSS. And you can argue about their algorithm. You can argue about this. You can talk to several people about, is their body of knowledge of Kev accurate to be used in that forecasting and prediction modeling, right? Some people say no, you're using telemetry that may or may not indicate it was an actual exploitation. It could have been a scan that triggered it. Who knows, right? So there's problems, but it explains why EPSS exists, right? It still leaves this big gap between, okay, let's patch only what matters and ignore all the rest. It's like that well-known South Park thing where you have a bunch of question marks and then profit, right? Those question marks are the kind of gray area we're talking about, where you just don't know everything that's being exploited right now. So you do have to kind of guess, right? And maybe EPSS is on the mark for some. It absolutely is not on others. So you can't use that as your only metric. So another thing, Arsenic would say something like, well, blah, 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 CVSS. Okay, cool. Which version? You're using V2, V3, V4?
I think we determined they were all pretty crap.
Yeah, but they're crap in different ways.
That's not, Brian, that doesn't make it better.
Well, what I'm saying is that V2 and V4 may be crap for your organization, and V3 may be better, right? But for James, he's like, oh, V3, screw that. V4, definitely screw that. They just fucked the monkey on that one, right? So his organization is legacy and uses V2. Jim, on the other hand, is like, nope, we have to use the latest and greatest, no other way. He's V4. So how do the three of you talk about vulnerability and risk?
So that's part of the thing that's always made me slightly nuts, is because what we've got is a million different ways to score, a million different inputs on that don't really, like as you've identified, don't really talk to each other on how to identify what's known exploited, what's being exploited, what's being talked about. Is having proof of concept code the same as being exploited? Some say yes, some say no. I know where you stand, but I'm just saying, like, there's an open debate, and then the fact that there is 19 different versions of CVSS just tells me that nobody understands what they're doing in respect to like, why would you have different versions of that's the part that baffles me, is why would you have different versions of math that you're not really improving on, you're just changing it. So it feels like, that the reason for that was, well, we could make more people like it. If you like that version, go with that version. If you like my math over here, go that one. If that one makes you feel better, go with that one. And ultimately they're all wrong and everybody's being led down the wrong path to slaughter. Like, make it make sense, Brian.
So it's not necessarily the score is wrong. A lot of people will ask, okay, why did they even make a new version? So from V2, the authentication metric was none, single, multiple, right? And that was done back in the days where you would log into a Unix system and then you would SU, right? Or, elevate privileges somehow. There's your multiple authentication. But then web app vulns came around. What happens when you have to log in as admin versus user? Well, it's the same, right? It was one metric. So V3 was like, okay, let's fix that, right? And it did. That was an improvement. Going with access complexity medium, meaning user assisted for V2, going to a dedicated metric. So now you have all these different fields. It forces you to change the math sum. So I understand why, but to your point, you are exactly right. Now you have two scores that can be radically different. And then that's not to even speak of the fact that so many people don't follow the CVSS specifications. There are certain vendors, no names mentioned, Oracle, that religiously do not score correctly, right? They don't follow the specifications, or they are intentionally downplaying it. We know this for a fact because Oracle releases their CPU and they're like, oh, this is a 5.0, right? And then 2 days later, James releases the advisory and it's like, holy shit, this is remote code execution. This is CVSS v2 10, v3 9.8. What were they smoking, right? There's just no way there could have been that kind of misunderstanding. So you can't trust the vendor scores. Then how about NVD? Well, it's based on the analyst. Are you looking at scores from when they were scored internally? Looking at scores now when they're outsourced? Who are they outsourced to? And Allegiance? Who's doing the scoring on their team? We don't know. So,
I just sense this pile, like it's like this carpet, and there's like junk being packed under it as you're talking.
That's exactly the problem. And so that's when you say CVSS doesn't work. Yes, you're largely right, but it's important to understand why. How did it get there? And then the other thing, this is unrelated to RSnake or anyone in the room. This is largely to a large population on LinkedIn. If you're going to talk about CVSS scoring with any kind of authority in your voice, ask yourself, how many vulnerabilities have you scored yourself, right? If the answer is less than 1,000, fuck off. Just leave the conversation. I'm serious.
Well, there goes my PG-13 rating, but I'll take it.
Hey, I'm cussing because RSnake cussed.
That's true. That's fair.
He gave me the green light by doing that. He said,
Are we scoring the different levels of profanity? Is that what
no? I hope not. All right.
I like how we have to meet the levels. That's what.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So real quick,
real quick, to put it into perspective, there's someone on our team that has literally done over 150,000 CVSS scores over 15 years. That's someone I would go to say, tell me the shortcomings of the system between V2, V3, and V4. Because also, as best I know, I think we're the only ones that are still scoring all three, right? NVD gave up on V2 scores, even though some organizations still use it. It's like, gee, thanks, right? So, again, perspective. If you've done scores for, a whopping 30 vulnerabilities, I don't need your opinion about why it's good or bad if you're going to speak with authority, because you just haven't been there in the weeds.
How do we fix this? Because these types of things always break down when you bring the human into it, right? As soon as it becomes subjective, somebody's feels, and you get 5 people in the room and ask them to tell me what color or red that is. There'll be 7 different answers. And then I'll get into a war eventually, and there'll be people stabbed. Like, how do we avoid this? Because this doesn't help anybody on the enterprise side trying to do the right thing. It just feels like a bunch of people who. It just feels like a bunch of people who all want their own opinion, smart, experienced or otherwise, that have an opinion. They want theirs to be known. They want their authority. And you'll listen to me, and this is because I know better. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Who cares? Because we all suffer because of the fight.
So that's how we get the 15th standard or the 8th color of red, right? Someone's going to say, oh, this is a better system. So let's ask me, someone who has been providing vulnerability intelligence for a living for a long, long time, right? How do we inform our customers which scores to use? The answer is we don't. We don't say, oh, use V3, V4, V2, whatever. We don't say, oh, use all three and take an average. That's just the wrong approach these days, right? Instead, we look at it more as, okay, what vulnerabilities can you just clear out, right? Oh, Ortnom 23, PHP Guracle, IT source code, all the junk software that are being CVE farmed, right? Today alone, I think I picked out 20 to 25 entries that came in from CVE, pure duplicates, right? So MITRE's not even doing basic duplicate checking. And this is in software that will never be run in a corporate environment at all, right? So let's just shave those off the top, right? Then go for, how about the people that aren't scoring correctly when it comes to disclosures that aren't vulnerabilities? And this is different than what RSnake said with his null term, which is clever. I like that. But this is, Jim discloses something and he's like, oh yeah, if James types in this long string into VI, it crashes. Cool, right? First off, the attack's never going to happen. He's not going to type in this long string. Even if he does, guess what? Vim crashes or VI crashes, and guess what he does? VI, it's running again. That's a stability bug. That's not a vulnerability. Because if I can trick him into typing all of that, I can get him to type anything I want, right? Oh, just open a PowerShell window. Type this in, you know?
I personally like RM minus RF star, but
right.
The system reset.
How many
We've always treated that, though. We've always treated that as an issue of, if you can cause an app to crash, that's the first stage that, and this was always the excuse, well, I can always get to remote code execution, even though I can never show it, right? It's always been, oh, if I can show I crashed it, that means I can control it to some level, right? And that's where this always goes back to the phishing is our default. I can't show any type of risk here, so worst case scenario, I could phish it. You crash it, and we immediately say, well, that's just the first step. We could do this later on, right? So, I mean, we
automatically
start converting those to RCEs, even though you really didn't RCE anything.
Jim, you're quiet again, and I suspect I might know what's going through your brains. This is what's going through mine. I almost don't give a rat's patoot about all the different versions and who's cool, who's not, who's, better at this type versus that type. Could we create something authoritative so like the rest of us just gets a slightly better chance of not getting screwed? Is it ego? Is this what everything in security comes down to? Ego?
No, honestly, I will say this is I think there's a tendency, and I think I'm kind of being overly polite here. Maybe it's the whiskey. It comes down to, we have a tendency of overcomplicating things. I feel like everything has to be layers of complexity, right? And having a scoring system you can reach into for a lot of people is like a comfy blanket, right? Whereas on some parts of the industry are about, how do I make this even more complex? How many 27-side dice can I use, kind of thing? Where when I look at a vulnerability, I kind of think of what are the critical factors that make it interesting to me in my environment, right? I don't need all these different layers to it necessarily. So you may score it a certain way, but I'm just going to kind of take a look at an extremely high level scenario, like very big, giant, big rocks kind of thing. And I think what would be exciting is to have somebody come up with, God, am I going to say this out loud? Almost like an oversimplified version, right? Like, in other words, we have these 5 scenarios. Here's what they all have similarly in common. And here are the major buckets, 3, 4 buckets you should look at to start down that path. And we already heard some from Brian already, right? Software that you're not going to see in an enterprise, knock it out. Something that is really more of a performance element or a stability element that James mentioned, knock it out, right? Because let's call it duck a duck. Sometimes we think things are security that have nothing to do with security, right? Mm-hmm. It's because we want everything to be about security. So we kind of capture something and we say, oh, that's a CV, that's a vulnerability, when in fact, no, it's something to do with something else completely different. And to James's point, right?
CIA allowed us to bucket everything to security,
100%.
right? I mean, the instability to crash your app falls straight under availability.
Yep.
And we can start classifying it, even though, you know, it's not what we typically think of as the security.
On the head,
right?
100%.
Well, it's not even availability if you can just restart it. But so one fun thing is that anytime someone starts talking about any of this, and to your point, Jim, about overcomplicating it, ask them the definition of a vulnerability and watch some of these people just spin and give you 15 paragraphs describing it. It's like 4 words is all you need to really define a vulnerability. 4 words, right? And this speaks to, is it stability or is it an availability issue, right? Does it cross privilege boundaries? That's simple. If I can make your app crash and stay crashed, I have now impacted your availability. If I can make your app crash and you type VI in your back end, I haven't impacted your availability. It's no different than a crash bug, right? And if my POC requires you to type in literally a 40-character set of arguments to VI to start VI to get it to crash and use an input file of my choice, come on, that's not a vulnerability. Yet they're getting CVEs, they're going in a cycle, they're mucking it up. And this kind of forward-looking goes to what Arsenic said, and we've been discussing internally for a while, is what happens when AI slop really hits, right? We know for a fact that MITRE is just going to flounder. They're going to fall over and just say, we don't know. And we know that for a fact, because if you jump back to like 2007 or so, Will Dorman, when he was at CERT, he did a project called Tapioca, where it was basically finding vulnerabilities in Android apps where the certificate wasn't done properly for updates, this and that, right? And he was able to mass test these apps. And after about 1,100 CVE IDs, MITRE put up the white flag and said, no more. You're not getting any more CVEs. Stop assigning them yourself. Because he was part of a CNA. So they told the CNA, stop assigning for actual vulnerabilities. Back then, that's how MITRE approaches this, right? So CVE is just not a viable path forward, and it hasn't been for a long time. For anyone that doesn't know, that's listening or watching, and it's like, well, how do you really know? Well, I was on board for 10 years. They threatened to kick me off 3 times for being fucking rowdy and calling them out on their bullshit. And then they finally kicked Karsten and me off at the same time by lying to the board to get them to vote the way they wanted. So not only are they not vulnerability database experts, they're more about the politics of this shit. That's where their strong suit is.
Look, do you think vulnerabilities should begin to be measured and prioritized based on proven exploitation? Is that where you put the line in the sand?
Yes and no. That's the first line. So we absolutely start with Kev. You patch those first. If this software is in your environment and it's known Kev, 30 days, no way. 7 days, no. You patch it tonight, right? Because we know what mass exploitation looks like. After that, we use a simple Venn diagram. Is it remotely exploitable? Is there a public exploit? And is there a solution, meaning a patch or an upgrade? Boom, there's your second tier. Those are quick wins, right? Relatively speaking. After that, then you go down the chain. You get rid of the nav, you get rid of the junk software, you get rid of anything else, games, this and that, where the games might affect us because we all play Halo or whatever, right? But you don't see them in the corporate environment, right? So start filtering those out, and your triage program should have basically filters that as vulnerabilities come in, it's like, nope, matches the criteria, in the bucket, right? Or into a separate thing that they could go observe later if they needed. Then focus on what matters.
How do you handle though something that doesn't fit in that Venn diagram today? You don't patch it yet because you're prioritizing the other ones. You've moved on. That thing's gotten old enough that patching that now is not a simple, let me just go do this. We're not catching up. And it may be operating system stuff and some of the software stuff, but I think of things like Bootstrap. I mean, I'm a web guy, right? So those type of libraries, right? Like, okay, yeah, this didn't affect me. This didn't affect me. All of a sudden, that thing affects me, but I can't even upgrade anymore because I'm so far past. And I know that's a whole issue of you need to maintain your software a little bit better, and you shouldn't get that far behind. But, if people are sitting there looking at that stuff and say, okay, I'm not going to patch this yet because I'm focused on the priority stuff, how long until that other stuff falls too far behind that patching it now becomes a bigger problem?
In the web or in the application world, like you said, definitely a bigger problem. It's basically a whole different kind of fundamental approach to patching and what it takes to upgrade, because it's not click patch or click upgrade. It is, wait, will this break all of my code? What do I have to refactor to get that new version in, right? So for those, there's no easy solution. But one thing I think that's overlooked is if you are building software and it's like, oh, I want to use a library. Oh, Jim's library, it's the most popular. Cool, I'm just going to grab it. I've heard about it, right? Did you go and look at the history of vulnerabilities in it? And more importantly than that, did you look at how they were handled? Meaning, what was the time to patch? What was the time for Jim to acknowledge the vulnerability? Is it 24 hours later? He's like, oh, understood. There's one. We'll start working on a fix. Even if it was 2 weeks to patch, that he's on top of it, right?
Yeah.
RAF has a separate library that does the exact same thing, has a fraction of the vulnerabilities and a 24-hour turnaround time, right? Maybe it's a little more painful to get it worked into your software initially, but it also lowers your risk considerably based on prior knowledge, at least, right? So that's what we, within our portal and everything, we call the total cost of ownership. Because it's one thing to pay $50,000 for a license for the software, but it's another if you take $200,000 in admin time to maintain it because of all the vulnerabilities in it, right?
That's it. So this is ultimately, Brian, where I having never scored a vulnerability on the professional side, scored tons of them internally because we were part of the patching team and I worked at this small global company. But it was our job to look through back when bug track and vuln track and all those things were a thing, to go look through, find when something comes up in the community or surface somewhere, do an assessment of the thing and send it to the appropriate team to go do something to take care of it. It started, when I started, everything that looked bad was like, ship that off for fix. And about 9 out of 10 of those bounced back and hit me in the head with are you kidding me? You want me to take a system down for a maybe? No. And then the thing that I really, really, I'm kind of like, we'll call that violent agreement with Arsenic is this shit costs a lot of money to maintain, right? We're spending a tremendous amount of money. If you were to do one of those fancy return on investment studies on patching, I don't think the outcome is very good. Even if you take those outlier events and go, well, that would have been a problem, right? If it would have happened, I think there's an intersection somewhere of your threat model and the vulnerabilities of the software and hardware that you use. And somehow they overlap or create some sort of Venn diagram where, yes, that is a threat only to companies that are likely to be targeted, as opposed to like just a company, right? That's not going to be exploited en masse. That will be exploited when somebody wants a way into that particular government contractor.
Let me stop you right there.
Yeah, hit me.
I'm going to stop right there because this is something Arsenic said. And he brought up, or I think you did, and he elaborated. He's like, well, what about Spectre, Meltdown, Rowhammer, right?
That was me. Yeah.
Okay. But he elaborated. He's like, oh, yeah, those are impossible to exploit, blah, blah, blah. Except for one wasn't, and it was used in ransomware.
But in the comment, like,
it's not even in the Sitsa Kev, I doubt, or it might be, but the other thing is when you talk about Spectre, cool. Spectre, V2, V3, V4, Spectre NG, V5, Ret2Spec, Spectre BHP, or Spectre BSE. So you have all the variants, right? And most of those have different CVEs. So
I've never heard of most of those. I don't know if that's a fault of mine or it's just like I started tuning that crap out.
Well, part of it is that they blur together, and us dissecting those took reading 18-page white papers sometimes and being like, this is maddening, right? I hate my life. Why am I doing this? But none of the Spectres have been exploited except for one, and that's Spectre V4, aka Spectre NG. But that was used in Stop Ransomware back in 2017. So he's wrong about that part. No one's going to use it, but he's also kind of right. He's like, who exploits that anymore? Well, is Stop Ransomware still around? Because it's part of their arsenal, right? Yeah. Maybe it is, and no one's reporting
it. So both of you are touching on something that kind of drives me bonkers a little bit. And there was I wish I could remember, but there was a paper that came out, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, about a pretty significant attack, certainly with the federal space, right? And they went through the top vulnerabilities in the CVEs that were core to that particular type of attack strategy, and there was 8 of them. Not a single one was newer than 4 years old. Not a single one. Okay? And I just kind of sit back and I go, okay, was that because of the legacy aspect that I think James and Raph brought up earlier? Is that because it's hard to patch? Is that because nobody's paying attention? Right? Was it that because the threat was looking for what it was possible to exploit to get into that? So that's that targeted nature versus mass exploitation, right? And this is where I think things get really challenging is you have this moving target. And you know, Brian, you just mentioned like 9 different versions of something. I didn't even like. There's only one. I thought there was only one, and you're like,
I was convinced there was more.
So yeah, right. And
Jim,
like,
the theme song only covered one variant. That's why.
So it's kind of like, man, great. You know how to organize this information, but then I'm thinking is the world that I live in is I got to take that and make it actionable.
Yeah, Brian, that's where I want to. All right, we're at 37 minutes. I probably want to go another 5, and because this could just go on all night, especially if we get drinks and more drinks involved. Brian, make it make sense in a way that we don't just continue the definition of insanity. We just keep doing this because that's what we've always done, and we'll just invent a V7 and a V8 of CVSS, and then everybody will be using 2 through 8. But whichever one you actually like is fine. And they're all going to be equally indefensible in court when you make the decision to use something that deprioritized the vulnerability that got you popped and cost you $75 million to recover from.
So before we get there, something else Arsenic said was spot on, is that if the cost of the breach is basically a line item in your budget that you can round out, what's the incentive to patch to begin with, right? And back when we were running at the time Data Loss DB, which became a commercial offering as well, but one of the things we looked at before anyone else was, what do the stock prices look like before, the day of, and after the breach? And we saw that thing. It dipped, came back up, and it either leveled off or went higher.
That's the crazy part.
And the best part, 10 months max. So by the time you could have a baby, your stock was back where it started, right? It's like, why does a company have incentive? And then people are like, well, maybe they need bigger fines. Okay, cool. But when you have a $10 million fine, which sounds great for a company that brought in $1.2 billion in profit this year, again, it's a rounding error to them. there's no incentive to patch. Jumping back real quick.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm leaving it up so anyone can write it down and look it up. When you talk about, oh, it's an old vulnerability, that's one of two examples we use, because not a single week goes by where we don't update that entry with new information about exploitation, because it's still being exploited to this day.
What is it?
Microsoft Office. Then ask yourself,
100%.
I know, but then ask yourself, wait a minute, why is this 8 going on 9-year-old vulnerability not patched in all these organizations? And when you go down that rabbit hole, then you get to your real problem. What does it actually take to patch some of these? Because not all Office vulnerabilities are click to update, right? That's why this one and the other one are constantly abused, because there isn't an actual just, oh, here's patch Tuesday, it's going to fix itself, right? That kind of goes back to, before we get to a new scoring system, we have to shift left. We have to get these companies to do better practices for coding, better practices for turnaround, and more importantly, better practices for that patch to be installed without causing downtime. Because you brought it up, RSnake brought it up, everyone does. We can't take this server off for an hour. We lose $1 million every hour this system is down, right?
Yeah.
We need to be able to patch these more real time without a reboot. And that's something that Windows is notoriously bad about, where Unix systems are much better about, right?
Yeah. If I had a shiny $2 bill, a nice crisp $2 bill, I would bet it on, and I'll have to go get some now to be like you cool bastards, but I would bet it on the fact that we're not solving either side of this equation anytime in the next decade.
I'm going to double down on that. We're never going to solve it, ever.
Come on, man.
Ever.
I don't know. Like, I don't know how to. I've always wanted to end this show, one of these, with like, all right, well, now we know what to do next.
Yeah, it's an upturn. Yay.
And every one of these, like, just walks up to the end of the cliff and we just look at each other and go, fuck it, and just dive. Like, why? Why do they all end this way?
If you wanted, like, unicorns and rainbows, you brought the wrong person for that.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, but I was hoping for a solution that's not, this is never going to get better.
So, we're never going to fix it. It's going to get better for some people in some organizations, but not all of them, and probably not a vast majority of them. So let's go back to what Jim said. How do we make this more simple, right? We don't need 13 or 14 different scores necessarily. We can rule some of them out, right? Then go to my model. Knock out Kev, knock out your Venn diagram, remote exploit available solution. Then you filter down by the software and where it's placed on your network. Obviously, internet facing. Number one, that should have been updated yesterday. If it's a client or basically what we call context dependent or user assisted attack, that shit's got to be patched right away. That's your Office, your PDF readers, anything like that, right? And these days, James will probably tell all of us better than anyone, all the different kind of files and formats that can be taken in and consumed by libraries, right? The amount of libraries that we cover for file handling issues, insane, right? Unfortunately, in the dev world, that's what he's got to focus on, right? So you have to kind of go to each of these divisions, and where Raph, you may be the one that's doing the triage and passing it off to Jim's team or James' team, right? They also have to understand the game. James can't just be a developer. He's got to be a developer that understands the security implications and what it's going to take to achieve that patch or whatever, put in a stopgap, or maybe his solution is, we're screwed for the next 3 months. We can't really upgrade this library, but in those 3 months, I'm going to add layers and layers of sanitization and, warnings and everything. And I'm going to put it, get us one step ahead so that no matter what the library we're using is or how out of date, we have extra, precaution in place. So you kind of have to look at it, again, defense in depth, but a little more nuanced and kind of farmed out to the different teams.
It's almost less about the score even and more about the different use cases of patching, right? Like servers, obviously, I can't have downtime. Do I have to come up with some solution, or I've got some sort of load balancing where I can mix new patch servers in and like swap out real time versus Office? Can I just sit there? You know what? We're patching Office right now. That's just the way it's going to be, right? There's less concern about, oh my gosh, I need downtime for Office. Let's do that. Applications, hey, we need to develop the changes. This is going to require a lot more effort, right? We have to fix the patch or write the patch. So figuring out that it's not all created equal in that sense as well, that depending on what you're trying to patch changes that whole game. And, you know, one of the complexities that we see, especially in the app dev world, you know, is, well, the server team wants to patch the .NET version on the server because that's vulnerable, but they can't patch that unless they get the okay from the dev team to make sure that that's not going to break the .NET application running on the server, and vice versa. The dev team's trying to patch something and make sure, you know, the coordination that has to be involved with some of that. You know, it's easy at the high level to be like, listen, you patched that yesterday. And it's like, yeah, our patching cycle is like 7 days because we have to go through 8 different environments. We have to do all this. We have to jump through these hoops. You know, like none of it's created equal, and very little of it actually has to do with the score at all.
It's so, God, I'm actually in the role of a listener right now. I'm just totally thoroughly enjoying this. James, what you brought up is amazing because it makes you think of the duplicative identity of vulnerabilities, right? There's the front end of understanding and how it relates to your world, to what Brian was talking about. And then you have a whole other calculation of, can I even fix it? Can I even fix it? You know? And I think that maybe that's why maybe that goes back to why we keep creating a new scoring mechanism. We're trying to find better ways to, hey, prioritize this one. When in fact we're talking, it's not just a long tail. It's like a big ball of goo with 2 long tails. You know what I mean? We got to fight this battle on both sides.
We're away from the getting into the weeds of understanding these things too, right? I mean, we've had some recent ones come out. It was very clear. This is the endpoint that's vulnerable. This is how they're going to go about it. There's exploit code out there. You know, an internal team can look at that. They can review it. And then if they know their systems, they can know, okay, you know what? It's going to take us a while to patch this. We can implement WAF rules to block this right now, right? Or whatever. But I think, Jim, you brought this up earlier, you know, as we start to lose sight of that. Like, that's why we have the scores, is because people just, oh, it's a 9.8, I got to patch it. And they don't have the ability to actually triage it and understand it to be able to say, yeah, we need to patch this. But first thing I need to do is implement a WAF rule. I can block this off right now, and we have time to patch it, right? Or these other complexities with our environment, you know, and instead we just look at it straight up as it's a 9. We got to stop everything right now to do this, and we don't understand those alternatives or ways to mitigate it properly.
But that's why we've got the scores, is that the amount of time it takes for you, the developer, to actually dive in and say, yeah, this is going to take us a month, or this is going to take us an hour. That time spent, you can't do for all vulnerabilities due to volume. So there has to be.
That's where I was going, Brian.
Yeah, there's got to be a way to get past the initial filter to the teams. And that's why we have CVSS and EPSS and all of these scores. And we're going to have more that are going to be the next utopia, or promise to be, yeah, this is, you know, going to be the next best thing. Is there going to be a scoring system that will account for all of that? Sure. It's going to be stupidly complex. I mean, your scoring string is going to be a monster. It'll start to speak to more and more of those data points that you want, right? Which we wrap in classifications and other metadata. But even then, now RAF has to understand that string or be able to paste it in and have it give him cliff notes so he knows how to triage. Right?
The more complicated it is, the less likely it. So there's, when you say complicated, the more complicated to understand and the more complicated to actually apply whatever patch, fix, whatever it is. The more complicated on either of those tracks, the less likelihood somebody's going to go look at that and go, yeah, okay, we're going to do that one. Now, and the volume that we've got, the millions of patches that people have outstanding, in their environments, unless you started your company yesterday, in which case you only probably have 10,000 vulnerabilities open, right? Most companies, like we got to a point when I was working at General Electric, where we got to a point where you're looking at this thing, you're going, you have 47,000 Windows vulnerabilities to patch, like that. Even like the most naive 28-year-old, 27-year-old purist in me back then looked at that and said, yeah, that doesn't feel right. Right. That math doesn't math. That dog don't hunt.
Yeah. So the solution for you there is automation. Yay. But then how you automate vulnerabilities, you need something like CPE. NVD is the gatekeeper, right? They've got the keys to it. What about those 112,000 vulnerabilities without a CVE and NVD that we have? We have to make up our own CPEs. And then when an official one comes out, we have to map that in. But we can't delete our old one because our customers are always using it, right? So it's a total clusterfuck from the start. And you have to have better vuln intel at the government level currently, meaning CVE, CISA, NVD, the trinity of suck right now. And if that gets moved out of their hands, whether it's going to be EUVD, no, GCVD or GCVE potential, right?
Or all these acronyms, you've lost. Like most people are like, what LMNO, PQR, WCV, VD? Like, what is that? A disease?
Yeah, but here's the best part.
Yes, is the answer.
Come April, all of those are going to be very relevant potentially. Because if CVE has any more erosion of trust, people are going to look elsewhere. And they already have been, right? CISA's little stunt with the CVE funding was the best marketing we've ever had. People are like, holy shit, you've got vuln intel that's a lot more comprehensive, a lot more timely, and you're not dependent on CVE? What's not to like, right? Now, the upside is they get that. The downside, it's a bigger fire hose. We're giving them more vulnerabilities they have to figure out, right? So it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory for everyone. But in my eyes, it's like I'd rather have more information and kind of drown in it than be completely blindsided. Because then what happens if you get hit by this major vulnerability and you get ransomware, and next thing you know, your hospital's shutting down, and you find out, well, that was kind of known about 2 weeks ago. Why didn't it come across CVE? It's like, which of those worlds do you want to live in? The fire hose or getting blindsided like that?
I feel like every time we get to a place where we start to offer up a solution, in the back of my mind, from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and winter was bad, and they were forced to eat Robin's minstrels. Yay! Like nothing. The potential solutions and options excite me less than the problem itself. And there are so many ways to screw this up that I think we need to stop talking now. All right, Brian, this has been fun, but we haven't solved anything. We've identified more problems, which is awesome. Thank you for that.
Did I win my bet?
On that note, what?
Did I win my bet that you now agree with me and Arsenic at the same time?
Yeah, I hate you both equally now. Great, thanks.
$2.
In one bill.
The check's in the mail.
No, $2 in one bill.
The bill's in the mail? I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Next time I'm in Denver, $2 beer is on me.
I know where to find them.
Oh God, that scares me more than that conversation. All right.
The beer.
All right, folks. That was the enlightening conversation. Exactly the enlightening conversation I thought it would be. Look, context. Yeah, 2017-0199. MSO. What was it? MSOA 13. Was that the one that there's still machines on the internet scanning for? I think that's the one. That nearly 20 years later, there's still machines scanning for it. Anyway. While Brian searches that, I'm going to log this out.
0867, Raf.
Yeah, that's a different. That's 2000 or 2008-0103, another Microsoft Office phone. But in reality, they're actually scanning for stuff older than that routinely, because there are
there you go.
Still exist that are still looking for old shit.
Oh wow!
All right, I have to log us out because I'm there. Look, this is empty, and I can't keep drinking it if it's empty. All right. On that note, guys, thanks for listening. Brian, thanks for being a great guest and bringing data to another one of these. I once again, I'm in violent agreement with both of you, and I hate the situation, and I feel less good about our prospects. James, I think we kind of agree on this. Like, this doesn't feel like it's getting better, and it's getting bigger. It's not getting better, but now it's getting bigger, faster. And oh, wait, that's AI coming? Here we go. All right. And on that note, before we start talking AI, you guys, thanks. It's been fun. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Ciao, everybody. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.